get you to call the roll now, and then you can just announce.
Okay, I want to make sure. Oh, there's Andrew.
Oh, good. Really?
Morning, sir.
Morning.
You look tired, Andrew.
A little tired.
I understand.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Evans, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Dr. Bullock,
Here.
Dr. Dempsey,
Present.
Dr. Fleming, Ms. Janeski, Ms. Morris,
Here.
Dr. Graham, Dr. Houston, Mrs. Jones,
Here.
Mr. Lockus,
Here.
Dr. Marr. Here. Stop working. Dr. McIntyre. Dr. Weddington. Dr. Wood.
Here.
And I'm here. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the October 10th, 2019 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This Standards Commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of licensure and educator preparation programs. My name is Patrick Miller, and I'm the chairman of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, and I call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the e-board agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If, during the course of the meeting, you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Before we move into this morning's agenda, I'd like to recognize Representative Craig Horn and thank him for attending our meeting this morning. Thank you, sir. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve this agenda for the October 10th, 2019 meeting?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for the October 10th, 2019 meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 And the agenda has been approved. Thank you. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on September 12th, 2019 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the September 12th, 2019 meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 And they have been approved. Thank you. I now call on Dr. Evans, Dr. Tomberlin, and Dr. Seiberg to provide the State Board of Education and NCDPI updates.
Good morning, everyone. The first update that I'm going to give is on TCED 016, the Beginning Teacher Support Program, those revisions to that particular policy. It was an action item, and it was approved by the State Board in early October. As well, the Pepsi annual report for 2018-2019, it was a consent item and was approved. And the emergency rules to temporary rules for state Senate Bill 219 was also a consent item and was also approved. Now Dr. Tomberlin will talk about the teacher compensation and advanced teaching rules year 2 report and AQUEP agreement for national accreditation.
Good morning. For those of you in the room, I apologize. I walked out this morning without getting my suit jacket, so this is not a sign of disrespect, it's just ignorance. So Dr. Stallings, is this? Oh, okay. Dr. Stallings presented to the State Board of Education this past month his Year 2 interim report on the evaluation of the Advanced Teaching Roles pilot program. And so I just wanted to share some brief findings from that report. I think that you all are aware of what the goals of this initiative are. And so if you'd like to kind of review those, there they are. I want to be very clear that the focus here is on empowering teachers to be leaders of other teachers and building capacity and leveraging our highly effective teachers to build capacity in our teaching force throughout the state. And that is the primary goal that we're going for with these grants and these innovations. And so those are the kinds of programs or proposals that are approved in our process. So this is based on a theory of action that these incentive plans can work to improve recruitment and retention in our schools by having a very strong and robust beginning teacher support or less effective teacher support, so that teachers feel like they are improving and are more engaged in the profession rather than feeling that they're isolated and not effective and eventually leave. And it also is to improve student outcomes. And that can be manifest through achievement scores, lower dropout rates, higher graduation rates, etc. So the idea behind the advanced teaching roles is it does offer a career ladder, or an articulated career ladder for teachers to remain in the classroom, but to have more formal roles and authority over the instruction in the school. The goal here is that you can stabilize the teaching force, the highly effective teaching force in some of our school districts that experience high turnover rates. So I think if any of you have seen the State of the Teaching Profession report that we produce, you know that certain districts across the state are highly susceptible to what we call talent drain, where their highly effective teachers move from those smaller districts, more rural districts, into the larger urban districts that have better pay, better quality of life, I guess you could say, by some perspective. And so this is an effort to try to recognize that talent and incent them to stay and help improve the teaching force from within. So this flowchart is getting increasingly more difficult to follow, but I think, which is often the case with our flowcharts. I think what Dr. Stallings has tried to convey here is that some of these approaches are longer term and some of them are shorter term. So the longer term approaches is that you're identifying teachers that are effective and you're recognizing them and kind of putting them in high profile positions of authority within the school, which allows with the short term effect that these teachers are more likely to stay. Research does show us that when teachers are recognized for their effectiveness, that they have a stronger commitment to the school and are less likely to leave. The longer term goals, of course, here is that these teachers are actively working to improve the instructional quality of those around them. And that's a longer term goal. And of course, that is the mediating force behind, or the contributing force behind ultimate improvements in student outcomes that are measurable by our accountability system. So, the focus of the evaluation, academic and instructional impact on the teaching profession, comparative analysis of the pilot programs. This is an interesting piece here that I found pretty fascinating. Because of the way this is implemented, this is not implemented in any kind of experimental design, so we can't make any causal inferences about, is it the advanced teaching roles that caused this? But what Dr. Stallings is able to do is say, does the fact that these school districts have a program have an impact, or do we see any kind of difference in those schools just by evidence of the program? And not really a causal connection, but more of a correlational relationship. And then finally, financial and policy implications. That's okay. So I'm going to skip through some of this because I would like to focus more on what Dr. Stallings found. And so those three questions that came up is really where he's going to focus on this. And so what I really appreciate about Dr. Stallings was this findings in a nutshell. So can I capture this in a really succinct way? And this is a conversation that he had with one of the advanced roles teachers. Their perception of how they saw themselves or him or herself in their role before the pilot and then after the pilot. And if you can see here, I only saw my classroom in the way I did things. And of course, when you're kind of standing in the bottom of a well, everything looks, the same. Or when you're in isolation, what you're doing seems like the right thing to do. But when this teacher is able to get out into other classrooms and see how other people do things, that kind of opened her eyes to other ways to instruct students. And then how what's going on in this teacher's classroom can have an impact across the school. And so that's really at the heart of what we're doing here, is kind of opening things up and letting teachers see other effective strategies in the classroom that they can leverage for their own students in their classroom. One of the things Dr. Stallings talked about is most of the findings from this report are qualitative. And those of you who know me probably understand that that's a little bit of a disappointment for me. But I recognize that understanding the qualitative is really critical to understanding how well things are going, or what root causes or what's causing things to happen. So I don't want to be dismissive of this, but I am continuing to push for some quantitative measures that help us understand the impact of this program on schools and students and teachers. So the general perceptions of folks participating in these pilots is that the quality of instruction has improved. They also find that there is a heightened attractiveness of the teaching profession. And what's interesting here is he found this to be true for both lead teachers and non-lead teachers. So the prospect of having a potential career path for non-lead teachers was deemed as a positive of this initiative. The recognition piece for high quality teachers. I think if any of you haven't read the report from the New Teacher Project called The Irreplaceables, I don't necessarily like the name of that title, that report, but that report really focuses on one of the main things that schools can do to keep their high quality teachers is to tell them that they are high quality and in a meaningful way. And not telling everybody they're high quality, but really telling those that are high quality that they are high quality and that they are valued and important to the success of the school. And so this pilot seems to be tapping into that feeling of teachers want to be recognized that they are exceeding in their field, and that brings them more opportunity. Retention of beginning classroom teachers. This is just another layer of support. This is just not the mentor process that we see in the beginning teacher support, but this is really a master teacher or a recognized highly effective teacher working with these beginning teachers in the classroom to support instruction and support their improvement in instruction over those critical early years. And then other observations are confidence in their own instructional practice. School culture is better, but we have to say that support for a differentiated pay model is still, folks are still somewhat skeptical about that, and that's understandable. This is we have a deeply entrenched culture in the way we pay teachers, and whatever we propose is going to be met with skepticism, and so that's a hurdle for us as to overcome as a state. Some of the limitations, this is small size. There's these programs were implemented differently. They're different programs. They're implemented differently across LEAs. As a matter of fact, 2 of our participants, Chapel Hill Carborough and Washington County, the nature of their pilots was so different from the other 4 that they weren't included in this analysis because they're not similar enough in their approach to this that we could say these are generalizable. They would be included in the evaluation of this program. The lifespan of this pilot is still relatively short. These are folks that are completing their 3rd year of the pilot. There are some learnings to be had, but these folks will have the opportunity to continue on with this pilot until the 24-25 school year. So I look forward to when DPI picks up the mantle of monitoring this program, and we're able to do it in a more long-term system. And then the lack of randomization is important for any kind of experimental design, and that just doesn't exist in these. Skip this. Skip this. Yeah, so we focused on 4. Let's go back to that. CMS, Edgecombe, Pitt, and Vance were the 4 programs that were deemed to have enough commonality that we could do a generalizable evaluation of their progress. So the classroom teachers were identified through EVOS scores for successful applicants, leadership ratings from the LEA, and the overall candidate EVOS improved between 16-17 and 17-18. So we looked at 1-year changes in student growth performance, and it was determined they were larger for ATR schools, the advanced teaching role schools, but these differences were not statistically significant. And so this is just a measure. The blue here are ATR schools, and the yellow are schools that were matched with the ATR schools because they were similar in size, demographic makeup, and performance of those schools. And so those are our match sample. So we're looking at the ATR schools relative to those schools. And you can see that there's variation across the board in how these schools performed. But if you look at the top half of this, the half where you've got the bars going out to the right, that suggests positive growth. And if you just look at that, just kind of eyeball that, you can see that it's much more blue than it is yellow. And that's what Dr. Stallings was trying to demonstrate to the state board, was that this is not statistically significant, but you can see kind of from on the surface of it or on the face of it, it does appear that ATR schools are generating higher growth with their students than the matched schools. And then down below, of course, those are schools that are experiencing negative growth, and those are the majority of those, or a plurality of those, are the match comparisons, and there are fewer of the ATRs. This is just the statistical model that shows that those coefficients, you can see, they show the bold ones are statistically significant. There's not statistical significance across the board, but the direction and the magnitude of these is similar through all the models that were run with all schools and without Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Washington. So the next steps, the year 3 update. We're going to look at LEA level implementation. What's common across the district in the implementation of this. We're going to try to extend some of these quantitative analyses, and we're trying to identify success stories in these programs that are scalable to the state level, because the articulated goal of this pilot is to create a kind of a database of practices that have proven effective in these schools that other districts can adopt with or without a pilot program. And then finally, descriptions of LEA implementation lessons learned. What do the LEAs that have gone through 3 years of this with the funding, what would they have done differently now that they're at the end of that road than when they started down that road? And I think that is the end of that. Dr. Stallings, in that report at the end, you'll see Dr. Stallings' contact information. If you'd like to reach out to him and ask him any questions, feel free to do so. I'm sure he would be more than happy to talk with any of you about this. And I'm happy to take any questions for you. I know that was really quick, and but
Did we see it?
I will answer any questions that I can.
Tom, is there a longer report if we wanted to read the longer report, or is this the findings that, I mean, is this a PowerPoint you made from a report, or did they?
So that was Dr. Stallings' PowerPoint that I was
Okay.
just kind of briefly.
There is a report, and it's on the state board website, but I can make sure to send it to all.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll
great.
get that out.
Thank you.
Dr. Tomberlin, first of all, either you take my jacket or I'll take your tie, and one of us will be appropriately dressed.
Fair enough.
When you mentioned uneasiness, I can't remember the exact word you used, with differentiated teacher pay.
Yes.
Where is that, sir? Who is feeling the uneasiness of that, or kind of surfacing the tension?
So I think Dr. Stallings indicated that the teachers themselves were concerned about a differentiated system. And I don't think it's, I want to clarify that. I didn't get the impression, Stallings could verify this for us, I didn't get the impression it was differentiated pay as a concept. It was, how would that be implemented? What are what's going to lead to that differentiated pay? Do we have sufficient measures to support that in a way that's understandable to the field, and that feels equitable? So.
And I guess maybe a follow-up question of that, were there any findings or even just initial thoughts on the particular roles being more effective? Because I know, you showed that one chart that kind of showed what the different districts are using. So lead teacher, mentor, that sort of thing.
I think, excuse me. So there is kind of a predominant model in this that is associated with a vendor, and so I'm hesitant to kind of speak to an individual vendor. But the concept of having teachers with demonstrated expertise in a content area, and I think most of these districts are focusing on the core content. So we're talking math, English, science, and social studies. Having those folks kind of operating as instructional leaders in those schools and kind of overseeing the instructional program in those subject areas seems to be a model that's resonating and achieving results. But different districts implement it a different way. So you can think about this, that you could do this on a content basis. So if you're a middle school, you could have a science advanced teacher, or you could have a 5th grade advanced teacher. And so different schools do it different ways. I can't speak to which is better, the content focused or the grade level focused.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Yes. So the other issue that came up, the other item that was brought to the State Board of Education and was approved, is the approval as of the AQEP, and I'm struggling now for what the acronym stands for. It is a really brilliant acronym. Anyway, so it stands for, it is, and I apologize.
Association for Advancing Quality in Education Preparation.
There we go. Thank you, Dr. Miller. So this is an accreditation body for educator prep programs. And it is a fairly new a body, and so the board heard from AQEP on what their focus and the goals of their accreditation process are, and you can see these 7 goals here articulated, and this is from AQEP. And so basically what the board was trying to understand is, did the board want to enter into a formal partnership with AQEP as an accrediting body? And so there was some discussion on AQEP. What does this mean? Why do we need this if we have CAPE? And so it was presented to the board as another option for folks, for EPPs, if they wanted to do something other than CAPE. CAPE is prescribed in law. If an EPP or if an organization is CAPE accredited, then they can set up shop in North Carolina without having go through any kind of approval process with the State Board of Education. So that's in law. And so with what really was being addressed here is, if the board enters into this agreement with AQEP, what does that mean as far as accreditation and program approval? And one of the things that I was trying to indicate to the board is, it would be very helpful for NCDPI if AQEP was another means, if AQEP approval was another means of approval, of kind of de facto approval by the State Board of Education as an EPP, because then then our office would not have to conduct that review of the program. We had some other body that was authorized to review that and give their stamp of approval for that. So that's what I was hoping for. We are, and the other thing that I mentioned to the board is, neither CAPE nor AQEP functions as a quality control for EPPs. That responsibility rests with the State Board of Education and is enacted by our Ed Prep program division. And so what I was trying to, one of the things I was trying to help the board understand is, this is just another body that helps us do the job of initial authorization. The job of monitoring and ensuring high quality performance from all our EPPs will continue to rest with the State Board and NCDPI. So our liaison, Dr. Teresa Coogan, was supportive of this. I am supportive of this, but I also want that support to come with the understanding that AQEP will function in some way that helps us do the work of approving EPPs across the state. And the board did approve this. So we do have a relationship with AQEP. That doesn't mean that that EPPs have to use AQEP, or that this is the preferred provider by the State Board of Education. It's just another approving body that the board recognizes as operating in North Carolina. So I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Has AQEP been CHIA approved?
It has not as of yet. So one of the things that was really important in this is, the question arose, were they CHIA approved? And there was some discussion about whether that lack of approval was a signal of CHIA, the federal government regulating body for accrediting organizations, was concerned about the quality of their program, or if it was something just administrative that was holding this up. We did contact folks in CHIA, and we got confirmation that this was just a matter of timing and logistics. There was no concern with the quality of the provider, and their expectation was, when they got their business back up and running, that they would be approved in a timely manner. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Other questions?
You.
Morning, everyone. I'm just going to give you a quick 2-minute update on another thing that was passed since last we met. On September 19th, the State Board of Education called a special meeting to approve the rules and policies to meet the obligations in House Bill 107, which the due date on that was October 1st. And specifically in there was the requirement of the small group exception for EPPs on the accountability measures that they had put in place. But what also was addressed in this meeting was setting up the thresholds required of the 3 accountability measures for EPPs. And that's specifically around NESIS, EVOS, and the recent graduate survey. Those are the 3 measures that are in the current accountability model. So on the 19th, the board met, set up a special meeting to make sure that we got this done in time for October 1st. TCED 008 and TCED 013, those are the accountability and the sanctions policies that sort of partner with the law, House Bill 107. Those were approved along with all the associated rules, which is sort of the mechanics behind how 008 and 013 are met. So if you recall, those were all part of this initial requirement in 107, but there's a second part in 107 which is yet to be completed, and that is for this organization to develop a weighted composite model, and the due date on that is February 1st. And to that end, the work continues with a subcommittee meeting following this full Pepsi meeting, where we've dug deep into what's going on in Tennessee, as well as some proposals for next steps. So the idea here is to champion the work with the subcommittee, and then once we get a more consolidated model, then to start sharing that with stakeholders to get stakeholder input, with the goal of getting it ultimately to this group and then to the board in time to meet a February 1 deadline, which was also outlined in 107. Any questions?
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Dr. Tomberlin, you're back up to present policy revisions to State Board Policy LICN 001, General Licensure Requirements to comply with the passing of Senate Bills 219 and 621.
Thank you. So, as you all know, Senate Bill 219 passed back in July. But there were some concerns about some folks that were left out of that policy. And so subsequently, Senate Bill 621, which recently passed, made changes to the provisions of 219. And once those changes were made, that allowed us to kind of move forward with some policy changes to LICN 001 that I would like to review with you now, that we would love your approval to take forward to the State Board of Education. Some of these are fairly substantive. Some of these are just minor changes. And I would like to just review. I hope everybody can see either on your personal device or on the screen, the red lines that we'll just go over really quickly in these. The first one, as you can see there, is this is just a removal of some language. There was a shift back in July of 2016 in moving from what we called an SP1 and SP2. We're taking out that effective date and taking out some of of that language related to the IPL. What is important here in 5 is an IPL may be issued to an individual who, and if you'll notice C here, so you can either hold a clear license from another state, or you could have completed an out-of-state educator prep program. We're not requiring that you hold a license, but you could have just completed a program from out of state. That program, of course, has to be regionally accredited. in order for us to accept that program. And then from there, we would determine what requirements are applicable for holding the North Carolina license. And in most cases, if you just completed an out-of-state ed prep program, we would require you to do North Carolina testing. If we move further down, conversion of an IPL to a continuing license. So here we've just added the residency license into this. We continue to make it clear that the conversion of an IPL or residency does not require the recommendation of the employing school system. The recommendation is not based on the perception of quality by the employer. It's a recognition that the candidate has completed the State Board of Education required activities. So technically, and the employing school system does have a place where they could withhold or stop the conversion of an IPL or a residency to a continuing license, and that is if the candidate has not completed a beginning teacher support program. So again, this is about meeting the requirements, not whether the employer deems the teacher's progress to be satisfactory. And here we start. This is the first instance where we start incorporating this language of a test has to be passed. Any licensure exams have to be passed before or during the third year of the license, provided the applicant attempted the examination at least once during the first year of licensure. Now, the important shift here in the language is, if you'll remember from prior policies, the license was connected to, the length of the license was connected to years of teaching. And so there was a lot of calculation that had to be done whether the teacher actually taught what we would consider a year before the license expired, or whether we gave them additional time. That no longer is the case. The language has changed to the year of the license. And so regardless of whether the teacher teaches during that time or not, the requirements are still in effect for passing the test, attempting the test in the first year and passing by the end of the third.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
So, my microphone's not working. There is some concern, right, from teacher prep programs that we have candidates who are taking licensure exams during student teaching or prior to student teaching. Do those students, should they not pass, do they again have to take the test in the first year? Because then we've set up a system where, again, this fairness question comes into play. Because if they had never taken it, right, they could have taken it in the first year and then waited 2 more years. But now what we're saying is, if you're a student teacher and we have you take it early and you don't pass, well, you're going to take it again, perhaps as little as 6 or 8 months later.
Can I ask if I can address that question a little later on,
Yep.
where I think one of the policy revisions is going to perhaps give you the answer to that?
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so moving on to 120B, effective September 1st, 2019, all applicants for an initial professional license or residency license must attempt the required pedagogy examination in the first year of the license and pass the pedagogy examination before or during the third year of the license. So this includes the pedagogy examination, the EdTPA or PPAT, as part of that requirement that teachers have 3 years to pass those, but it is a requirement for all teachers applying for a license after September 1st, 2019. Just a point of clarity that's come up, lateral entry licensed teachers, the last of the lateral entry licenses were issued before July 1st, 2019. Any lateral entry license is not held to the EdTPA requirement, because those provisions for a lateral entry license were kind of frozen in time with 599, and we can't change those. And so we have communicated to the field that no lateral entry teacher is held to the requirement of the EdTPA, but your residency model folks and your traditionally prepared folks that are getting a license after September 1st will have to meet that requirement. There is a note here of some importance. If we scroll down here, effective June 30th, 2019, elementary education and ECGC, we should probably write out what ECGC stands for there. ECGC, of course, is Exceptional Children General Curriculum. Teachers with an initial professional license, lateral entry license, or residency license that is set to expire on June 30th, 2019 due to failure to fulfill the licensure examination requirements pursuant to 115 shall be granted an extension until June 30th, 2020. This is an important change that we got with 621, that initially it was only IPLs that were granted this extension, and lateral entry and or if there were any residency license, which there shouldn't have been, out there that were affected, they were not included in that extension. And so 621 rectified that. Your lateral entry folks and the residency folks are included. It is important to note that the only deficiency that can qualify for the extension is testing. So a lateral entry teacher that may have had deficient coursework, we cannot extend it for those folks. So if we move down to number 3, for those individuals who apply for an IPL on or after July 1st, 2019, and do not attempt licensure exams during the first year of the license, the State Board of Education shall direct the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction to monitor teachers' compliance. If a teacher is not in compliance with any examination requirements, NCDPI shall notify the teacher. So, Dr. Marr, now back to your question. If the candidate took the required licensure exam during the student teaching period when he or she was not licensed, it could not count as the first year attempt. I would have to issue a sternly worded letter to that candidate, but there is no consequence to the license for not meeting that requirement. The way this is, in our understanding of talking to legislative staff, is that the allowance of 3 years to pass the test is not conditional on attempting it in the first year. It is just an articulation that the expectation is that the candidate take it in the first year. And so we've indicated here that we will notify the candidate by electronic communication, whatever email address they supplied with the application, that they did not meet this requirement and that they should meet this requirement. But failure to receive, read, or acknowledge that non-compliance communication in no way absolves them of their responsibility to pass the test by the end of the third year. Yes.
So it is not required, it is not actually required that they take the test in the first year or during student teaching, because the license will not be revoked in the absence of having done so.
So if I can say it a little differently, but I think gets to the same way, it is required that our team notify any teacher who did not meet the statutory requirement of attempting the test in the first year. But our understanding is that communication is the consequence for failing to meet the statutory requirement to attempt in the first year. I am purposely not turning around and looking at Representative Horn because I know that I'm doing a little dance here, but I think that this is, we've got no word that the expectation is that we expire the licenses of folks who do not make this attempt. I have not heard anybody make that kind of statement or expectation, but we shall send those letters to folks who do not meet that requirement. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, and Tom, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place to bring this issue up, but we were talking about extending and we're talking about expired license, and you may tell me to wait till we get to a different section. I'm okay with that. But something that has come up from the field is the fact that we may have a teacher who completed an approved program, met all the requirements for the university and was recommended for licensure, got their license, but never actually taught. Maybe they went and worked at another outside agency, and their license ultimately expired. Now those folks are coming back saying, I want to go into teaching. I really want to teach, but there's not a clear pathway now in LICN 001 for that to happen. Historically, we would have extended that license. We would have extended it, and they would have had the opportunity to finish their testing requirements, because maybe they took one test, maybe let's say it's elementary, and they took the reading test, and then decided, I'm not going into teaching, I'm going to go over here and do this job. Now they're wanting to come back in, or they're wanting to actually teach. They'll still have to meet their BTSP requirements, their beginning teacher requirements. They'll still have to finish testing requirements, but we don't have a pathway right now to actually extend their license unless we can say they're going to be grandfathered in, and their license will be extended, and then they start following the trajectory that we've laid out here, where, at the end of their BTSP, their IPL now, if they're not successful in finishing the testing, then they could go to a limited license. So that's kind of something that's come up in the field, and we have some districts who are saying, no, I'm sorry, we can't hire you, and we're turning teachers away, and others who are saying, look, we need to have this grandfathered in so that we can figure out how to get teachers in the classroom.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up an excellent point here, and I think it directly relates to number one below this that I just read, that has been stricken from the policy. And basically, we had a policy in place that said, if you were an initially licensed teacher and you failed to meet the requirements to convert, at such time that you have completed all those requirements and come back to us, we will issue you another IPL, and you could meet the beginning teacher support, whatever you needed for the conversion, but we wouldn't give you time. We wouldn't give you 3 years to pass your test. If you got the license and you allowed to expire, what the state is saying is we'll grant you another license only when all the coursework and testing requirements have been met up front. And then we'll give you the IPL, which would give you the time to meet the beginning teacher support requirement to convert the license to a CPL. This has been stricken because it's not clear to me in the law if we have the authority to do this anymore. But I think this is something we can certainly consult with. I think this is a big enough problem that we need to have maybe a subcommittee look at this in conjunction with our legal team to see what we can provide under the law. I don't think. The way I read with the new IPL requirement, it's pretty clear you have 3 years. Your clock starts regardless of your situation. So if they took the license and they elected not to teach, that clock is still running and it expires. And you're right. We don't have a way under this current system that we can bring them back into the fold. And I'm not clear that we could bring them back in a way that allowed them multiple years to pass the test.
So historically, I will just say, and whatever we need to do from a legal standpoint or legislative standpoint, but we would have historically been able to extend that license, right? And get a teacher in the classroom. So just because somebody recruited them over here to go work at SAS or to go work somewhere else for 5 years, right? Now all of a sudden they want to come back and teach. There's not a pathway. And so I know there's some districts out there, some very large districts that have hired quite a few teachers that fall into this category. So I know we're going to hear more about it.
We have kids who go directly into graduate programs. They apply
Oh, that's
for
right.
and are issued an
Thank
initial
you.
license, but they don't actually go into teaching because they wait and they go into a graduate program and do a full-time grad program, and 2 years later they get out of the grad program, and now they have 1 year left on that license to do 3 years worth of work.
So I think what's important here is that we kind of flesh out all these issues that could result in somebody not completing the requirements within the 3 years, and what the path back for them is. I think we need this subcommittee to kind of lay out the kind of common issues that might result from this, and then I think in consultation with our legal team, we then need to understand, is this a policy that we can recommend to the State Board of Education to address this, or would we need to incorporate our legislative liaisons to seek statutory pathway for this to occur? I don't know off the top of my head which is the appropriate way to go, but I think it's something that we do need to address.
I just want to make sure that as part of this conversation, that we talk about what the time limit is, because I've had 2 requests for people that graduated in 1994, ironically, this summer, and it was very difficult to figure out what to do with those folks and what would be fair for them and fair for the district and fair all the way around, right? And ethically, what I could recommend as a dean and a director of teacher ed. So I'd like for us to think about time limits, like if you've done it in the last 5 years or the requirements are the same, but if you've done it over X amount of time, then perhaps you do go into a residency program to finish your whatever you need to do, or whatever the pathway is.
And I think later we're going to talk a little bit about the residency, and I won't bring that up now because that may tie back to what you're saying, Dr. Bullock, as well, about forcing people to go back to a residency model who've actually completed everything but a test, right?
Right, so, but I think there's got to be a time, like if it's 24 years ago,
Agreed.
Right, the program is different.
the program is very
Program they
different.
completed is different than the program our candidates are going
So they need
today.
some kind of different type of support to reentry. So what's the best route for that, right? We want them to be in the classroom if they want to be, and if they can be successful, but what's the best way to support them and keep them to stay? Because there's some other factors here as well, right? We want them to retain.
Yeah. So one thing the one thing that we're implementing in the licensure office that's procedural, it's not policy related, but is related to this, is we've often had to struggle with people coming back with a license that they might have gotten in 1994. And it's kind of the course catalog argument for colleges, like this was the course catalog that I came in under, so those are the requirements that I'm held to. And we've, as a licensure office, we're kind of moving away from that and saying, if you held a license and it expired, then whatever requirements you were held to at that time are moot. When you come back to renew that license, you are operating under the new rules, whatever they may be. And that's going to, I mean, it's not directly related to you, but I think it's in the same vein of what if your program is fundamentally different than it was when that person went through it, and you don't have confidence that that they've been prepared sufficiently for today's teaching, then I think we have to kind of pull the plug on that and say you've got to start anew.
Tom, I apologize if you answered this earlier, but in item 5 under 1.20 C, the person holds a clear license from another state or completed an out-of-state educator preparation program. This is to issue the IPL. You follow me?
I'm 120.
You're on 120 types of licenses.
Okay.
Number 5.
Okay. An IPL may be issued to an individual.
Right, and then jump to C, holds a clear license from another state or completed an out-of-state educator preparation licensure. If that person completed that program more than 3 years ago and has not passed the exams, they're not eligible for licensure.
We don't say that there. So what you're suggesting is there a time limit from I completed a program, but I didn't seek licensure in that state,
Yes.
to now I'm applying to North Carolina for a license? It's the same issue that's being raised
The rule
here.
applies in state or out of state, the rule applies.
Okay. I'm going to mark this.
Tom, you
I mean,
clarify
I'm
that?
assuming that is correct, because that would again create unfair proposition for in-state.
Right. It's the same question you're raising with a teacher who got a North Carolina license and went to SAS and worked for 10 years. What are our expectations of that teacher once they come back and say, I want to teach? So what if I completed an EPP program in Michigan and I decided not to seek licensure in Michigan or anywhere else, and I come to North Carolina and say, well, I completed an EPP program. What is the time limit from the time of completion of the program to when we'll say, yeah, we'll take you? And, I think this is not prescribed in law. I think this is clearly within policy. It would definitely have to be a rule that we made related to this. So I think that this is a discussion and a recommendation from Pepsi of what you want that time limit to be. Clearly, 1994 is too long, but is 3 years enough? Is 5 years enough? Where do we draw that line?
And just one other comment you made, maybe this, we can discuss it later in the document. It appears we have inadvertently created the situation that a person can come into teaching in North Carolina without having completed a preparation program and without having created any licensure exam check and teach for 3 years.
Yes.
We have now endorsed that by virtue of doing this, we are endorsing that.
That is my
And there is
understanding.
no check. Now, I might say the irony is later today, we're gonna have a conversation about accountability.
Yes. So
I don't want that point to be lost by this commission and the people we represent. That is a massive irony.
Is there anything in this that talks about accountability of their enrollment in a residency program?
So
Timeframe
if
around
one of
that?
these folks applied to, let's focus on the out-of-state completer without a license. I mean, that's the critical piece here. So to Dr. Dempsey's point, Van Dempsey's point, yes, that person could be granted an initial professional license. They would have to do so. They would have to be employed to do so, and they would have 3 years to pass those tests. At the end of that 3 years, if they couldn't pass the test, they wouldn't be. Their license would expire. They could also approach this from a residency model, which is probably more unlikely that they would come in and seek a residency model if they'd already completed an ed prep program. But yeah, the way this is set up, they would be identified as, if they were from a regionally accredited ed prep program, they would be afforded the same kind of requirements that a North Carolina completer would be.
And Tom, I don't want us to get lost in the fact and see there, it says it holds a clear license from another state. And typically to those of us it holds a clear license from another
Or.
state, right?
But the
Or
Or
completed
is
an
the
out-of-state educator prep program.
Doesn't say and, it says
Has
or.
completed, so they're initially licensed.
That's
So
right.
they're getting the initial license, right? And then holds a residency license has been recommended, right? Or holds a clear license from another state. But none of those things do we see. What I think where I was tying this to was the expired license.
Right. It is a
That
different.
this is somebody that's completed, I mean,
Right.
the
No, it's a
program
different
in
question.
1910 and is now trying to come back without an expired license or something, right?
I think I don't want to speak for you, Dr. Van Dempsey, but I think the argument that the irony that is surfacing here is that for North Carolina ed prep programs, we're allowing these teachers to come out and have 3 years, but we are monitoring the quality of those programs within the state, and so we have some basis to say, yes, you can teach our students for 3 years while you pass the test, because we know that ed prep program is of high quality. What we don't know when we accept it from, I don't want to even name anybody.
University.
Well, no, not in North Carolina. Out-of-state entity. I have no idea. I know you're regionally accredited,
Right.
but I have no idea of your quality.
Well, we're looking at effectiveness when we do hire them as to whether or not we
But these are people who have never taught.
Okay, so if they've never taught at all,
They have no
period.
credential of any kind.
Well, I will say from the field, we do not want to go backwards with not being able to bring in teachers from out of state and giving them an opportunity to take a test.
I don't think anybody's saying that.
I mean,
I think we all agree that
okay.
we're
so
gonna get teachers from
That's what
different
I'm hearing,
pipelines.
is that we're looking at reversing what this commission has actually said will help us put teachers in the classroom.
We're not putting teachers.
That's not what I heard you say. But
We're putting people in the classroom. We're not putting teachers
Oh,
in
but
the
we are
classroom.
putting teachers in the classroom.
Oh.
Well, philosophically, when you start teaching, I think you become a teacher, not when you prepare something. But I'd also just add, play devil's advocate a little bit. The check is if the teacher's not working out, the principal can let that teacher go,
Yes.
or the superintendent can make sure they have principals in the building. who are
Except
actually
when you have
paying
a critical
attention.
shortage in the state and you can't fire somebody because you don't know that you have somebody coming behind them.
Well, that's a hard decision, but I mean, one that a principal has to make every day. But there's absolutely a check.
Do we have data that that's actually happening? In the current state, where we've got 5,000 lateral entry teachers, we have vacancies in schools across the state, I don't think there's any evidence that we're actually firing people.
Well,
I would also say, from my point of view as a member of the commission, I understand what you just said. That is absolutely unacceptable. That trial by fire is the gate for entry into the profession. Okay, go try it for 6. And do we know the average tenure of people who enter teaching now? How long they stay in North Carolina?
It depends on their preparation pathway. So if we look at what we call traditionally prepared teachers, North Carolina Ed Prep prepared teachers, at the end of a 5-year window, about 70% of them remain in the classroom. If we look at out-of-state prepared teachers and lateral entry teachers, from that same 5-year window, about 40% of those groups remain in the classroom.
with lateral entry being higher, correct?
Lateral entry being higher than what?
With the turnover.
Leave within 5 years.
Well, they roughly had the same turnover rate as what I'm getting at.
Oh, okay.
Out-of-state prepared and lateral entry of about 40%. But we also don't know, I mean, to Mr. Lakis's point, we don't know the extent of the support and preparation and perception of those teachers that may be contributing to that attrition rate. And I do have to say that, to Dr. Marr's point, the evidence from our State of the Teaching Profession report is that a very, very, very small percentage of teachers are dismissed in this state. So the job that you folks have is really hard, because that is the tension that this board is designed to address, is what is the proper balance between upholding the quality and the standards that are required to enter the profession and actually staffing our schools.
I think to the point that you're talking about, would the data show that teachers are being terminated versus
Coached out.
coached to
Right.
resign, because our school board attorneys work to seek a resignation because it clears the district's
There's a lawsuit.
a resignation and a release, and it releases us from potential litigation down the road. So it's very hard to sort out from the legit resignations for a teacher moving to another district versus a resignation that was forced or coached. So I would say that the bulk of the resignations are legit resignations for teachers moving, going somewhere else, but there are a large number of resignations that the district is involved with in coaching or forcing. And Glenda, I think you would agree with that.
And I would say that too. So while there may not be data out there to support, I mean, you can go look at the teacher dismissal list and it goes back for years and years and years, but typically those are your most egregious. What we're doing at the school level or the district level is trying to coach and support teachers. We want to grow them, right? No matter if they come from out of state or their lateral or their residency or they come through an approved EPP in this state, we're trying to coach and support. If that doesn't work, then those folks, the majority of the time, we don't have to go down the route of termination, dismissal, right? We want to coach them into doing something else, and they understand quite quickly that this is not an area I need to be working on, and then they make a different decision. I don't think we'll ever have data that will support a high number of teacher dismissals in this state, because our job is to coach and support. And back to the trial by fire, I don't think it's trial by fire. If I have a teacher that has completed an approved program in any state where it's regionally accredited, and I can bring them in, and my administrators and my superintendent and my board approve these individuals to teach in the classroom, and we are monitoring, observing, evaluating, coaching them, and we're helping to make sure we have high qualified teachers in the classroom under the state requirements. If we're doing all those things, I don't consider that trial by fire. I consider we do have a critical shortage in the state of North Carolina, but I can promise you, the majority of the state that I work with, we are not keeping teachers in the classroom when we know they are ineffective. You may never see that on the front page of the newspaper or, you know, on one of our television stations, but we are doing our very best with observing and getting them out of the classroom.
I just want to make sure that it's clear, that is not the point that I made. Of course, districts and schools everywhere do excellent jobs in many cases of helping people who come into the classroom completely unprepared to be a teacher. We're the preparation commission, not the you get a chance and let's see how it goes commission. We are making a statement that it is now acceptable in North Carolina to go, and I want to challenge the issue of being a teacher. If someone walked into whatever the closest hospital is with the surgery room and started doing surgery, we wouldn't call them a surgeon. People are not teachers because they walk in a classroom and start doing something in front of children any more than they could be a policeman or an engineer or anything else. Let me try building a bridge and let's wait 6 weeks and see how it goes when cars start driving across it. No other profession would accept that. What I'm saying is we have created a situation as a commission where in North Carolina, you can go into a classroom, particularly for people who come in totally unprepared, and there's a 50% chance, it sounds like 60% chance, they're going to be gone within 3 years anyway. So they're going to get 3 years without having done anything as a matter of educator preparation to walk in that classroom on the first day. That's my point. Not that you're not doing great work under the conditions that you have to hire people. We as a state should never have those conditions in the first place, and we are now endorsing it.
So, but we've done that for years and years and years with lateral entry. So I would argue, I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying there, but I would say we've been endorsing that prior to this commission ever being formed, when we said that we could look at alternative licensure and put folks in the classroom. No matter what we call them, we can call them a lateral entry teacher, we can call them initially licensed or continuing teacher, but we're putting them in the classroom with a bachelor's degree and no ed prep program.
Shouldn't be doing it.
Well,
Shouldn't be doing it.
that's all, yeah, a whole different, we just don't have the supply to say we're going to only do it this way.
Can I ask some questions back on this document?
Yeah, but I would, before we go back to this, I would like to say that we are happy to bring. We have loads of data on these issues, and so I would be happy, and I would offer to this commission the opportunity to bring data to this discussion, so that we're having these discussions. A lot of times, these discussions get wrapped up in our own perceptions, and while I agree with Mrs. Jones that her district and other districts may have this posture towards how they counsel out teachers, I think there's tremendous evidence that other districts don't have that opportunity, and they are getting teachers that have been counseled out of one district that can afford to make those decisions, and they wind up in those districts that are low performing and are continue to be ineffective with teachers. So this is a very, very gray issue that needs a lot of data to help us understand what's happening in the state and what the realities are beyond the perceptions of what's going on just in one district or in one EPP.
So Dr. Harmon, last comment about that. I believe it was October of 2014, and I'd have to check my facts, that our legislators actually put a law on the book that said if a district would pick up the telephone, they didn't say it quite this way, I'm putting it in layman's term, pick up the telephone and call that district, for a reference, then they would not be accepting a teacher who is an ineffective teacher or that has been coached out. And we say that at the state level with our PAINT meetings all the time, with our regional meetings. It's called a reference check, right? Pick up the phone, call the district. Don't pass that to some other district. And then I would also say that those districts that are doing that with Fidelity are also the same districts that are recommending to the state when we send up something where we've investigated a teacher for something way more egregious than that. And then when we go out and look at the list to see what happened to that teacher, nothing happened to that teacher where we thought it was severe enough to send that teacher, right? And I think that's a bigger issue outside of this commission, reference checking, and then making sure that if we are referring a teacher for something more egregious, that there is something more than a hand slap on the teacher, and they get a letter, and it's going to come out of their file in a year, and yet I'm going to go next door and work in another county for a year.
I think these are all issues that we can do whatever this commission needs in order to make informed decisions about this. We are committed to bringing the data to bear on those questions and providing you with those data.
Jump back in there.
Okay, so two things. One, for the out-of-state program prep, what's the validation that they, in practice, right? I'm asking a practice question for
Okay.
licensure division. What is the validation that they completed an out-of-state preparation program?
So
Will it be the form?
Yeah,
from
the Form
dean?
V.
Okay, that will stay in place. All right,
Yes.
that answers that question for me. And the second question, which got turned into a different discussion, is there anywhere in this document that says I'm in a residency program or I have signed up for my coursework, or where is the check and balance for that?
I'm sorry.
So like I come in as a residency teacher, where's the balance from DPI? We're checking on testing that I'm taking my residency program. Where's the check for that?
So in order to be issued a residency license, an EPP has to complete, so it's basically a modified Form V where the EPP completes it in the LEA. That would have to be renewed every year. And we'll get to that a little bit when we talk about the residency license,
Right, thank
of
you.
where that becomes critical. All right. I have no idea where I am, so I'm going to turn to Dr. Evans to remind me where for the out-of-state 120D.
Where's that? That's A, that's B.
So I do want to point out, yes, that this whole section for North Carolina educators from out of state, that was the old version that was on the books because we had some folks that were still operating under those provisions. Those have now, that's all expired. Those have been stricken from the policy. And then 120D is the prevailing policy for educators for licenses for out-of-state educators. In order for any out-of-state educator to be granted a CPL, a continuing professional license in the state of North Carolina, that teacher must provide effectiveness data. It's defined by evaluation data and, where applicable, student growth data. Now, one of the things that we're going to do as the licensure office is that has to be submitted as part of the application process. And so if you're applying for a license in North Carolina and you meet the requirements for CPL, that has to be done at the time of your initial licensure, and your effectiveness data has to be submitted. In addition to submitting the effectiveness data, the teacher has to submit either the documentation of the model that was used to create that effectiveness data, or point us to some kind of online resource where we can see what this data means that we're being handed. So it's not as easy as just saying, here's my stuff, give me the CPL. We've got to be able to track this back to some effectiveness model and validate it. Out-of-state educators with more than 3 years of experience, we will waive the requirement to test if they are fully licensed in another state and have 3 or more years of experience and have either met comparable testing requirements in another state. Just to remind you all, comparable means it is the test of record in that state. It was the test that was designed to support the license in that state, and it has to be set, the cut score has to be set at least at the vendor's recommended cut score. So if a state decided I'm going to use Praxis 315, and Praxis recommends a cut score of 150, but we lowered it to 140, we will not take the 140. You have to have the 150 in order to be to not have to take our examination. We did move National Board Certification up into C because it is an or on this. You can have testing from another state, or you could have National Board Certification. We'll take either one of those, but in order to be granted a CPL, you have to have effectiveness data. There's no way around that. Elementary and ECGC, of course, have to have subtests of math and reading. Those have to be clear passing subtests of math and reading. This is a problem for some folks. You may get an overall score and an indicator that math, reading, social studies, and science was covered under this test, but you don't have a subtest score on that. We can't accept that. We have to have a clear subtest, we have to have a score, and we have to have an indication that that score met the requirements of the vendor or the state in which it was produced. I think that's all. This is a repeat of all that for ECGC and elementary.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
If it's a teacher who doesn't have effectiveness data, does that rule them out of this? Say it's an art teacher or a music PE or...
So we could still waive the testing requirement, but issue the teacher an IPL.
Okay.
They can't come in with a CP. They can't be granted the CPL without having the effectiveness data. But that doesn't mean they would necessarily have to test. All right. So out-of-state educators with fewer than 3 years of experience. So this is really only applicable to elementary and ECGC. For any other subject, if you have fewer than 3 years of experience and you have a test that supported your license, we will waive the testing requirement in North Carolina if it meets the comparability standard. However, we cannot do this for elementary and ECGC. So here we stipulate that you have to have, for either one of these subjects, you will have to take the North Carolina required assessments. I should note that if you have more than 3 years of experience out of state and you don't have the subtest of math and reading, we do still offer the foundations of math and reading as an alternative to the Pearson or the Praxis exams. In section 1.30 provisional license, we have worked with the Exceptional Children's Unit to update the federal policy on the EC license. And so it used to be if 80% of the class qualifies for an exception area, the teacher had to be certified in that area of EC. But this is an updated policy that was given to us by EC. And so in the area of exceptional children, teachers must hold the appropriate license that matches the primary area of eligibility of at least one student in the class. When an EC teacher is considered a teacher of record for a content in middle or high school, that teacher must also have the corresponding content area. So if I have a class made up of, and I have multiple EC students, and some of them, I don't even want to sound stupid by trying to list the different EC classifications, but you have multiple students of different EC classifications, and the teacher's EC license matches one of those students, then you're good. However, if a teacher is teaching if an EC teacher is a teacher of record in a high school or middle school class, in addition to holding the EC license, they also have to hold the content area license in order to be an in-field designation. And then jumping a couple sections to 1.60, the residency license.
Tom, before
yes.
you go there, and I'm not sure if this is where it would fit either, but because I do have a question about residency, but the adding, if you have a clear license already and adding an area,
Right.
I know that's in here somewhere, and I have feverishly looked for it, so you maybe can point me in that direction.
So we did make a provision for, so there is a provision for elementary, and we didn't put this in the policy. So
have it in
there are
there.
two issues that, let me explain to the group what the issues are. So for elementary and ECGC, it has been determined that those license areas cannot be added by what we call 24 or test. So if I get a license in, let's say, middle school math, I can't, in conjunction with getting that license, add elementary and ECGC to that license just because I have 24 hours that would qualify me for that, for holding the residency license. And this is a practice that we've had in the past, and so the question has come up: does this apply to elementary and ECGC as well? And our licensure office has said no, that it doesn't, and they point to a certain law. And in reviewing that law, it's also become clear that that process of adding a license by just coursework may not conform with existing law. And so this is a topic that needs to be addressed, and I think it needs to be addressed in a subcommittee, not kind of in a full meeting, and have a recommendation, and that needs to be done in consultation with our legal team as well.
I do want to give some examples of that
Yes.
where we're thinking about that and the impact it could have on the field. So for example, right now, if we have a person who is licensed middle school maths, right? So 6-9 middle school math, and that person could already be licensed when we get them, or in just that, well, they would be. Let's say they're licensed in that area. And we look and they have 24 hours in math with a C or better. Now we can add 9-12 math to that. Sometimes we have graduates where the university's already done that. The university may have had a middle school licensed language arts teacher, and they went ahead because the person had 24 hours in social studies, and that individual came to us with, and the caveat being there, they're going to met the testing requirement in one of the areas and have a clear license with no restrictions on that, and then add with the 24. So we will need to understand the devastating impact that will have, right? Because one of the things we really look for at the middle school level is dual licensure, but at the same time, if I've got a clear license in 9-12 math, I can add, if there's 24 hours, I can add just go ahead and add the 6-9 math to that for a teacher that may be able to move them around instead of asking them to take another test to add that area.
Right. And I'm not arguing the utility of the
Right.
policy.
Right.
I'm arguing the legality of the policy. I don't know. The reason this became an issue was the elementary ECGC question raised this issue. And so in kind of my research into the question of do you have to take a test? Why can't we add elementary or ECGC by 24? What has prevented us? And in finding the statute that prevented that, there was also in that same statute language that seems to suggest that any IPL, adding a license area to any IPL requires a test. And so I mean, I'm just raising this as an issue. I understand how it could impact the field, but I think in cases where we just need to have a discussion around this issue and get our legal folks to weigh in on this and determine, are we fine? If not, what's the way forward to addressing this?
There are accountability concerns with that as well, right? So going from a high school, so if I completed a high school program, going down with 24 hours to a middle grades, right, might not present as big a challenge as someone who completes a middle school program. The 24 hours required in the middle school program aren't quite the same as the 24 hours required in a high school program, and we see this at NC State in particular in mathematics.
Sure.
That the differences are pretty stark, right? And so I have some concerns from an EPP's perspective if we're going to be held accountable for folks' performance, yet we didn't really recommend them to work at that level we recommended them, say, at the middle school level. They're teaching at the high school level. They may thus be ineffective. We didn't approve them to work there, right? We didn't prepare them to work there, but then we're going to be held to account for them in the accountability piece. So I just want to have that out there, right? I don't know if that has any bearing on what we're talking about, but
Oh,
I think it's
I think it
important.
absolutely does.
Have bearing.
And I think one of the things that when we discussed this at another point, I think it was in one of our meetings that it originally came up, we could have a system where you're cascading the licenses down from any license issued at the 912 level would automatically extend down into the 6-8 level. Couldn't go into elementary school, but you could set up the system where you've got the licenses cascade downward so that it provides more flexibility. That would certainly be something we could look at in terms of how do we address this situation. But I think the first order of business is getting a subcommittee that's going to address this and getting them in the room with our legal team and understanding what the law says and what our current practice is and whether we're in alignment with law.
I agree, and just would like to remind the commission that we have 28 minutes to finish the work on our agenda today before the subcommittee meets. So if we can, let's try to slog through this. We still have a presentation left to go.
My apologies.
No
I will,
problem.
Okay, so the residency license, a residency license, of course, has two requirements in order to be successfully or to be administered or granted. You have to be employed. The candidate has to be employed with an employing school system, and they have to be affiliated with an ed prep program. Now, I want to be very clear in the language of the statute of the policy. It says an EPP and an LEA. So why that is important is it doesn't have to be the same configuration as when you started on your residency path. This would allow residency holders to move EPPs or LEAs or public schools, or you could change EPPs. The important thing is here is that connection has to be met. There is a minimum GPA of 2.7. One of the things we've indicated in here for clarity for the field is once an individual holds a residency license, this is applicable to an IPL as well, the individual may not hold a permit to teach or emergency license. So the emergency license can't be used, or the permit to teach can't be used to extend a residency license or an IPL. And I think that's it. Mrs. Jones, if you don't mind, can I just articulate the issue with the residency license? So one of the things in policy is in order to clear a residency license, the candidate must complete all the coursework requirements from the EPP, and they must pass the test. Now the question has become, now they have all 3 years to pass the test like an IPL does, but the question becomes, can the individual come off a residency license onto an EPP prior to passing the test so they wouldn't have to be affiliated with an EPP until such time as they pass the test? The answer in policy is no, but I think Mrs. Jones is raising the question of why can't that be the case? I mean, the policy is clear, but
So I think you said EPP there. So in essence, I'm on a fast-paced residency model program. I finish everything in 1 year except for the test. I have a residency license. I'm working. I finish all the coursework with the residency program. And an EPP actually brought this to my attention. And it was a great question. So I get to the end of that with the EPP. EPP says I can recommend this person for licensure because they still have 3 years to take the test, right? So at the end of that, well, they can't. According to policy right now, they cannot, because it says they have to have continued enrollment with an EPP, and they have to have met all the requirements, which include testing. So now we're forcing the EPP again to do the job of the state board, which was the testing requirement, right? So it's kind of like one of those catch things where you fixed it, but then all of a sudden it's an issue again. So I'm bringing that to the commission because I was asked to do that, and it's going to become a real issue because you will have folks who will finish, and a residency is renewable 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, but the person has 3 years. Are we going to force a teacher to stay enrolled and pay a fee for 2 more years with the university or until they finish the test?
Right, that is the question. And just to clarify, Mrs. Jones is correct. Under the policy that was passed, that is the situation, that you cannot come off the residency without passing the test. And so the issue that is being raised is, do we want to amend the policy to allow those folks to come, if they've completed coursework, can the EPP go ahead and release them, and they can finish out the 3-year term on an IPL rather than a residency license and incur cost. Now,
But the person would come into the profession as a clinical resident. They would have those 3 years. They would not have passed the test, and they're going to get some kind of buffer period. We presume, if we follow the logic of what's happened in the last couple of years, 3 years. So they will have taught for 6 years without actually being.
no, let me clarify. They're not. So, in no case would any candidate have more than 3 years to pass the test. So if they rolled off the residency license after year 1,
Prior to the 3rd year.
prior to the 3rd year and onto an IPL, they would still only have the remaining 2 years to pass the test. Now, this does cause some challenges for our licensure department to keep up with that, but I'm never going to let hard work stand in the way of good policy. So I do recognize the issue that Mrs. Jones is raising, and I think it's a valid issue. But again, it's an issue for this committee.
And they're not eligible for that, what is it, the limited
Nope,
license?
they're
The
not
one where you sign an affidavit and.
They would be eligible for limited license yes, they would be eligible for limited license. If after year 1,
So
if you
Van's
had,
point's correct then, right? They could teach almost in perpetuity without having passed.
so the maximum they could leverage with the limited license would be 6 years. So let's say
They teach for-
they took all 3 years and they couldn't pass the test at the end of the 3 years, regardless of whether they went from residency to IPL. At the end of that 3 years, if the district deems them effective, they could apply for a limited license that would carry them through another 3 years. But that issue is unrelated to, I think, the question that
Right,
we're
because
That
right
limited
now-
license can be renewed.
No.
No,
No, it's.
it is
the
not
3 years
renewable.
is it.
No.
But they cannot be issued a limited now the way the policy is written with regards to the residency.
No, you could have the limited license is available to any what we would call entry-level license. So you could do it off of a lateral, you could do it off of a residency, you could do it off of a limited. Technically, under the provisions of the policy, you could, at the end of the first year, if you passed all the requirements other than testing, one would be eligible for a limited license.
But then who is recommending that? Because the EPP is the one, and I think that's the discussion you and I had. The EPP, at the end of that 1 year, you've met the requirements for the EPP. The EPP cannot recommend for a limited. That has to be the district.
No, it would be the employer.
It would be the employer.
Yeah.
So how are we removing, I mean, you're saying now that the residency, when you finish an EPP's requirements and I have a residency license, it's going to be the employer, not the EPP saying that they've checked the box and they met all the requirements outside of testing.
So I want to be clear, we're talking about what's possible under policy, not what I would recommend. I would not recommend that we leverage the limited license after the first year of a residency license if the person has completed all the coursework and not passed the test.
So you're recommending they would stay enrolled and pay a fee for 2 more years?
I'm not recommending that, Mrs. Jones. I'm pointing out that the policy indicates that that's what will happen.
Okay.
If we would like to change the policy, this is the forum to do it. But until that policy is changed, the answer to the question is yes. They will stay with the EPP through until such time as they pass the the required
Which is what I,
license.
that's what I want
Yeah,
to make
that's
clear,
exactly right.
right?
But I don't
They
want-
cannot go to limited in the middle of this unless we change the policy.
That's right. And so raising this issue of can we leverage the limited license from a policy perspective, I think that is not the right approach as opposed to getting the policy the way we want it so that everybody's clear about what we should be doing.
Is one of the problems the inconsistency of what happens with a clinical resident parallel to what happens to a person who completes a university-based program but didn't pass the licensure exam, and they can petition the state board to teach?
I think what we're experiencing here is the parallel of these two situations, because the scenario that Mrs. Jones is setting up here is that person has completed their ed prep program under the terms of the licensure. They just did it in a year, and they still haven't passed the test. Now, I think she's raising a very valid point here. Why does that person have to remain financially obligated to an EPP until such time as they pass that licensure exam?
And we would need to make that change in this policy.
The policy as it reads holds them to that requirement.
It needs to be a statewide.
I think that would go for the subcommittee to discuss with all, we've got a bucket of issues. The limited license is there. It is basically administered as it exists in law. If anybody has any questions about it, I'd be happy to cover it for you. But I think it's pretty straightforward as it's prescribed in law. Lifetime license is something that I think does need to bear some conversation. The 30 years of teaching as a licensed teacher doesn't require renewal. We've got some real pushback from the field on questions around this. The limited license, from our interpretation, the only licenses that are appropriate, only those licenses that are appropriate for classroom instruction are eligible for the limited license. Administrator licenses, any other kind of, this is a classroom teaching license. Administrator and student support licenses are not eligible. For the purposes of this policy, individuals whose major responsibility is either to teach students or directly supervising the teaching of students are deemed to be engaged in teaching. So why that's important is if I'm a music teacher for 15 years and then I decide to become an administrator, I am still technically teaching as an administrator. At the end of 30 years, I can apply for a lifetime license in music, but not as an administrator. And so we want to give credit to those people who are working in central office locations who keep their licenses, the content area licenses, up to date and valid during the term of that 30 years. And this is what C says, is that if you keep that license, you've got to keep that approved teaching area valid during the term of the 30 years in order to qualify. And then 2 is from the law, and it throws a wrench in all of this. Completed 30 more years of creditable service with teasers. So if you've got 30 years on the books with the retirement system and you hold a license, you could technically have been working, well, let's just say in DPI. Or you could be working at the Department of Transportation for 26 of those years, and your licenses, your teaching license, as long as you kept it current, would be a lifetime license. So that's in law, so we've put it in here. It does kind of throw some wrinkles into this, but you know, I think it's fine. Well, it is what it is. So. And that's it. That's what I have for you for LICN 001. Yeah.
Glenda, you've got a lot of work to do in subcommittee.
Good thing he didn't wear his jacket. He might have sweated through
That's
it.
exactly right. Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. Are there, can you, Glenda, I don't know if you have this or the team together, can we encapsulate for the full commission what the licensure subcommittee, it seemed like I had 3 things on my list that the subcommittee was going to work on, that being the first one that we just talked about. Do you remember the other 2 pieces?
3 that we've talked about today.
Yes.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Well, just the residency one that we just talked about, what the recommending he will do if they complete all requirements after the first year, except for testing. And then the extending an expired license for an individual who maybe never taught but met all the conditions to get an initial license outside of testing. And then the third being being able to add to a clear license an additional area with 24 hours.
That's the cascading that we, okay, got it.
And the time frame for the second one, right?
Yes, and that'll be one of the areas under there.
Yeah,
All
thank
right,
you.
thank you. Are there any other questions? Hope not, because Dr. Tomberlin has left the room, but, yes, sir.
Excuse me, if I'm out of order, I'm out of order, but I gotta tell you, I wish I would have had about another 24 legislators and all the staff over here for that discussion you just had. But you also bring life to a phrase I use in the legislature all the time, and that is lots of things are simple, but nothing's easy.
That's exactly right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, really, I really enjoyed and appreciated and learned a lot from this, just sitting in on this discussion.
We appreciate you being here. So with that, I will entertain a motion to approve the policy revisions to LICN 001 so that we can send those to the state board in November.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve those revisions with the knowledge that Ms. Jones is going to bring forth some more revisions in the three areas that you heard discussed a moment ago. So last chance for any further discussion. Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, that policy revision has been approved. Thank you. And we are short on time, and we apologize to our friends from Best NC, but you have graciously agreed to come back to us in November, and we look forward to hearing from you all in November. Please accept, again, my apologies for our running over on this discussion.
Maybe they could vote first.
We'll look forward to putting you on the agenda first in November so that that doesn't happen again. But thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for today's discussions. I'd like to remind the commission members that our next monthly meeting will be held in this room on Thursday, November the 14th from 9 to 12. We've now completed our meeting, and unless there's additional business at this time, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
That was,
Good times today.
it's so